Live streaming is on.
There it is.
Wow.
Welcome everybody. I'm really happy to see the attendance here, especially from the new member side. I mean, usually we have a few other consistent members, but today we have Dennis and Mark. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be discussing Taoism and Stoicism. We've been kind of in a philosophically comparative mood recently. Last week was Buddhism and Stoicism. Today's Taoism, and next week we already set up. We're going to discuss the Stoic roots of Christianity, which we did once before, back in, had to have been October, November, or even I think earlier, maybe September. But the whole discussion got revitalized again a couple weeks back when we discussed cynicism. And we just had to do it again. So this is kind of our 4-week, I guess, special on philosophies and comparing and contrasting them in the Western world, or I guess Eastern world this week. So like usual, for your information, Dennis, and for your information, Mark, unless we do these topics twice, or unless we do an application of Stoicism, a lot of times if we do these compare and contrast philosophical episodes, we also don't know anything about them. What we do is we go dig up some resources. I put them in the event description. We read some of the texts, we watch some of the videos, we learn more about them, and then we discuss them here. So we're also not experts. So feel free to participate if you guys also don't feel like you know little about it, or Mark, in your case, if you know too much about it, please please let us know more about what you know. Without further ado, I kind of wanted to open it up with just my first impressions on Taoism, and then I'll let somebody else speak. I'll open it up to the floor, and please use the raise the hand function if you need to speak. I was actually a bit curious. I've always been a bit more curious about Taoism than Buddhism. Mark is completely correct. There's similarities between Buddhism and Stoicism are just too parallel to miss. I mean, if you're a Stoic, you're probably a Buddhist without some of the extra spiritual flair, I guess you could say. But with Taoism, there was kind of pieces where they were similar, they were different or contradictory, and in places where I thought actually I could use to complement Stoicism. But one of the first things I wanted to open up with was there's a huge emphasis in Taoism and also in Stoicism about letting go. There's an extent to which this diverges from Stoicism. I was reading an article by Massimo Pigliucci, but in Taoism, there's also this huge emphasis, just as in Stoicism, to disregard certain external events as just being in accord with nature. There's this kind of inherent indifference. They don't mention indifference, but they discuss this kind of big practice of letting go of your judgments or impressions about the external world. And this is something I found really, really aligned with Stoicism. When Epictetus discusses in two main parts of his Kyridion, his letting go of judgments of events and his distinguishing between events external to yourself and internal to yourself. So I just wanted to open it up with that. And if somebody else wants to take it away or kind of give their input, I'd be interested in hearing it.
Mm-hmm. So what is the text you're referring to?
It's not any one particular text. For one thing, I did, so there were actually a few sources that actually Philip helped me out a little bit on this. We found a couple of really good playlists on Taoism and Stoicism, specifically Taoism, but they actually mention a little bit of Stoicism. They make some connections. One is, I'll write it in here actually.
Do you have a chat log or a place I can pick up things? I don't know how this system works.
There it is.
There must be.
If you check there should be a.
Okay, now, okay.
That's one playlist I found. He's a channel that does really good playlists on Taoism. There's another one that that Philip had. If I just switch to my other screen. You'll put it in? Okay. Tea Time Taoism. That's it. They have really good playlists. Tea Time Taoism is especially by a Taoist or a Qigong or Tai Chi student living in China right now, and he posts videos. He has an entire playlist on Taoism. It's really interesting. And there's another, I always love his articles, an article by Massimo Pigliucci, which I found really interesting. He does a good comparison and contrast with Stoicism and Taoism. Somebody post that for me?
I put the,
yes,
that was the one. I just put it in there.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'm drawing a lot of my knowledge from these different resources. I have read Lao Tzu's work, but I think these articles and videos do it better justice by giving a better analysis. Some of this, short few line poems in Lao Tzu's work or in the Tao Te Ching are interesting, but I think what's better said is kind of the ideas pulled from that and the parallels you can make with that between Taoism and Stoicism. Yeah, Philip.
Thanks. I picked up an edition of the Tao Te Ching for this meetup, and it's too much to work through in like a week. So I only started with I think like the first 15 chapters, poems. But it's a really, really good edition because it's basically 2 pages. On one page you have the text, and on the other side you have annotations, so you don't have to constantly flip back and forth. And it's it's very dense. It's very pregnant with meaning. So it's very nice and easy to refer to the translation notes and the deeper meaning when it talks about the 10,000 things. The 10,000 things is a reference to the material world, and it's very, very good. Highly recommended if you're interested. For me personally, I started to get interested in Taoism like sometime last year. I find myself very often like I have a hyperactive mind. I always need stimulus, input. My girlfriend says I'm always processing, and it helped me to become a bit more quiet. I'm struggling with that a little bit right now. I'm kind of falling back into my old behavioral patterns, but thinking about flow, being in the moment, those kind of things I found very helpful, and I was really excited about this topic because it allowed me to engage with the material again and become a little bit more practice a little bit more. I would say specifically for this meetup and for the parallels with Stoicism, I found the main sort of overlap, and maybe you can elaborate later, but I just want to say something relevant to the discussion. The view on the natural world. So the Tao and the Logos, for example, general, almost pantheistic view of the world around us, which I found very interesting, something that resonates with me a lot. And like you said before, Steve, as well, the light attachment to our convictions. And I bookmarked this because I thought this was something that really kind of slapped me in the face with how relevant it seems. It's the end of the second poem when it says, they work with the myriad of things but do not control. They create but do not possess. They act but do not presume. They succeed but do not dwell on success. It is because they do not dwell on success that it never goes away. So for me, this is like, it reminded me very strong of this idea of you succeed, but you don't dwell on successes. So you recognize that success is not only your own, but that you're part of a fabric. You're product of your environment to a degree, and your environment facilitates your. As Kai Whiting said it, you're not an island. I found this very striking. So it's very early on. Like I said, it's the second poem, and yeah, it's full of those little moments when you realize that how similar they are.
Yeah, that was one of the first things that struck me. It wasn't so much Taoist ethics, which I think is very subtle. For some reason, whenever I tried to pull Taoist ethics from what I was learning about Taoism, it wasn't explicit. It was implicit. It was something that if you follow the Tao, or if you follow Taoist principles, the ethical principles follow from that. But Taoism seems to be more concerned with metaphysics, and that's what really was interesting. That you're right. I mean, there's a huge parallel between Logos and the Tao. Also, their mystical feature. I feel like people don't talk about this, but how we keep people. Almost every meetup, there's somebody who asks, "What's the difference between Logos, reason, and nature?" And we always have to say, "Well, it depends on your translation. It depends on your interpretation," because that for the Stoics, there was little apart from an equivalence between those concepts, reason, logos, and nature. There was kind of a mystical nature about it, and the same thing with the Tao. I think in the opening line, I can probably paraphrase it. I can't repeat it, but it's like Epictetus is Enchiridion. Like the opening line is really poignant. It says something about the Tao that can be spoken is not the real Tao, or something like that. So it already connotes this mystical fabric of the universe that you can't accurately access, but you have to understand is still there. By the way, I wanted to ask, can you give us the author and the translation used for the Tao Te Ching? Because if it's an annotated version, it's really interesting.
I'm putting it in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah. So I mean, I definitely echo your sentiment. The one big departure, though, of course, is that I don't think there's a Taoist equivalent of reason. I think Stoics like to place the emphasis that nature follows this this principle or this flow of reason. Sorry, the Stoics like to think that logos follows, or nature follows this flow of reason called logos. And that we have access, we could access it because we also are rational beings with the capacity to reason. But for Taoists, there was no emphasis on that. There was no indication that you could ever access it. There was no ever an indication of using reason. It was more about, in fact, the one big difference I saw between the two is that with Stoicism, you should practice using your reason to access nature, to access logos, and be virtuous. With Taoism, though, there's a complete opposite practice that they advocate, that you should actually try to let go of using. I don't know if they ever have explicitly said reason or rationality, or if they have equivalents of that, but you should let go of using any kind of strong focus or will to try and access nature, and rather just let go and let nature be and live in accordance with it naturally. And that was only, but I'm not sure if that's a contradiction. It sounds like only a difference. It sounds something like where the two could be compatible with each other to an extent.
I think they are compatible, and it's just in the tradition of Western philosophy versus Eastern philosophy, that the one is framed as the rational mind, and I had a feeling that Taoism, exactly like you said, is more intuitive, more I don't want to say maybe emotional is the wrong word, but maybe it goes into this intuitive, emotional sort of direction that you feel what is the right path, what is the what is the Tao, what is the path to follow. But I think it's just because of the way that it's expressed, because for us, like, we have access to reason, and it is internal to us. In the old texts, it would have been in the old Stoic texts, it would have been the divine spark from Zeus that we have all within us, that we all share. So I don't think it's really a contradiction. Like I said, I think it's just goes back to the tradition of Eastern Western philosophy, how it is expressed. I think you
Yeah, go ahead, Mark. Mark, your mic is off.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah. Could it be that it's static versus dynamic? I mean, the little bit I know about Taoism is it's all about the flow and the way and river, the metaphor of the river and floating on the river, and which is very powerful, I think, the river of life. And you don't have that so much in Greek philosophy. It's more atomistic. It's more in blocks. So this flow idea, I think, is different. But they're getting at the same thing. They're getting at being at one with nature, with what is. I find the Taoism more convincing, frankly. But that's just, yeah. Do you all have a meditation
Actually,
practice as well? Do you have a meditation practice? Because that's the way into this. It's very hard to really analyze these things.
Yeah, not so much at the moment. Like I said, I struggle really with my busy mind, and that's been a recurring theme
Meditation is good for that.
I know, but the mind hates meditation.
Okay. It protests.
There's exactly, it protests. I'm always, like I said, I always need the input. I need to process. It's just how my brain works, and I know it's not good for me. And sometimes I do better at actually, for the longest time since I got into Stoicism, I was meditating every morning, every evening. And then when I found cute, when I found out about Taoism, that only intensified my interest in it, and mindfulness, meditation, and those kind of things. But like I said, right now it's quite difficult. But sorry, please.
Yeah, Dennis, go ahead.
Continue. I didn't know. I thought you had finished. Continue. I'll go on the back of that.
No, I just wanted to just quickly get back to the idea of the river. There's one anecdote that I read in preparation for this, which was about some ancient Chinese ruler in the flood and diverting the course of the river. So the idea was, or basically the main takeaway of the story was, it's pointless trying to dam the river, because the river is, it's in the nature of the river to flow. So the river is going to flow. The only thing that you can hope to achieve is to divert the river. And by diverting the river, this ruler actually managed to, irrigate fields, and the community prospered. And I think we find a very similar idea in Stoic texts, when you think about accepting your circumstances and doing the best with what you have, and being virtuous in the situations that you find yourself in. I think there's again, I cannot remember where I read this, but there's this idea about the obstacle is the way, or becoming the way. yeah, I this is again, yeah, some very strong thematic overlap, let's say. Please, Dennis.
I just wanted to based on what you just said, Mark, in terms of the meditation, that question. There is a book. It was written by Sulala Tower. This is the guy, like on a podcast, he was talking about this, and that's how I got into, that's how I found out about Taoism. But in his book, which is called Practicing the Tao Te Ching, you've got the translation of the or like his translation of the verses, right, of the book, right, and then a sort of analysis, and then practice. So there's 81 practices. So these are different kind of sometimes meditations or some sort of things to incorporate in your life. I mean, I can't speak of experience because I've literally just started 2 days ago, right? But there is meditations related, like, to bring Taoism more into practice or into your life, let's say. So I just wanted to that I was reminded by that when you asked that question, Mark, about meditation.
I would also be interested in just manageable day-to-day meditations. For the longest time, actually, for about a year and a half, I was practicing Qigong, Wudang Qigong, in Berlin. There's a couple of schools here. And I think I need to maybe reorient myself towards meditation only. When I was practicing Qigong, it was something I think I was forcing myself. This is actually something I think Taoism could inadvertently help myself with. When I was actually practicing Qigong, I felt compelled to force myself to do it because it would be good for me. And I think for the longest time, I was kind of preventing myself from realizing that it wasn't really a passion of mine. That was the extent of my meditative practices in the past. I spent a year and a half basically practicing Qigong, but it wasn't something I was passionate about. I would also be really interested in like these day-to-day meditation tools to use. Could you provide a reference to that, Dennis, actually?
Yes, I'll post the title of the book.
In the chat.
Yeah.
Thanks. I actually didn't know. So I knew that the yin yang philosophy, the dualist philosophy, was an incorporated element of Qigong, but I had no real idea to the depths to which Qigong was fundamentally a Taoist martial art. Until I started watching that playlist, actually, Philip recommended Tea Time Taoism by the practicing Qigong martial artists in China, that I began to understand the real connection, which is a shame because I wish I knew this while I was practicing Qigong, because I really love reading about Taoism. It's really like you, Philip. It's something I admire, but I never knew the connection there between the practice of Qigong and Taoism until I was watching that channel. Thank you, Dennis. There's a podcast to it too.
It's just one episode, but that's the podcast how I got to Taoism. So, and it's really insightful. It's the author of that book is being interviewed in that podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, Philip.
I don't see any hands, so I'm just gonna take control. I think maybe one. I'm actually curious to know to hear your opinion. If you think this is a fundamental difference, or if it's just some apparent difference, which is that in Taoist belief, So there is, the Tao from which everything originates, and you have the idea of the symbol of Taoism, the yin and the yang, and they represent, like you said, duality, the good and the bad. But I do not believe that in Taoism there exists the same concept of virtue and vice being as pure as they are in Stoicism, right? In Stoicism, you say that no vice can take part in virtue, or the other way around, because they're the absolute ends of the spectrum. They're indifference in between. But actual virtue cannot contain even a trace of vice or of an indifferent. But in the yin and the yang, they inform each other. They take part of the same whole, and to some extent, they also contain each other. Right? If you look just at the symbol, there's the little black dot in the white part, and there's a little white dot in the black part. So I'm curious to hear if you think this is a fundamental difference between the systems, or if this is or if there exists some way in which this apparent discrepancy can be reconciled between the two.
I don't know, and you've already said this, I don't know if there is there's so much about ethics in Taoism. I don't think they're that worried about what you should or should not do. I think it's about being in tune with nature and everything else. So I think the whole idea of virtue, I think, is foreign to that way of thinking. It's just, it is what it is. It's its nature, and you surrender to it, and you float down that river, and you embrace things, but you don't worry about if you're doing the right thing. Whereas the Stoics would. I mean, it's all about virtue and doing it for the right reasons, and being, what's the word? Not externalities, but what do they say? The Stoics, the external events that happen are the indifference. You go back and ask, am I doing the right thing for the right reasons? So there's a real ethical teaching in Stoicism, which I don't think either Buddhism has the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths and all that. Taoism, the little bit I know about it, I think that has none of that. That's what's so interesting. It's just being. And there's no devil, and there's no vice, and there's no evil spirits, and there's none of that. It's just peaceful.
It's a really good answer. I wonder if that stems from their, because every time I read the Tao Te Ching, I haven't read the Shuangzi yet, but every time I read the Tao Te Ching, it's always writing in opposites. So when you read it, it's like it's struggling with itself to reconcile the duality. So I wonder if it kind of, this prohibition of itself to ever claim one virtue over another is kind of a enactment of its being with the Tao. Just a floating idea in my head. I was also thinking, actually, Mark, you made me think of this, and I forget. It was while you were speaking. You were talking about how much Stoicism focuses on ethics, and then I was thinking of Seneca, and I remember Philip or somebody else mentioned this, that Seneca liked to go out drinking with his political buddies, and it reminded me of the Stoic virtue of temperance. And I think there's an extent to which in Stoicism there are examples, and I think Seneca would claim this, that you could not break from a virtue, but you would be allowed kind of like a vice, like alcohol, where if you would do it in excess, that's too much, that's unvirtuous. But if you do it in moderation, it's okay for the right reasons. So I'm not sure if that's kind of a loophole. Just a thought I had about that.
It's very appealing, I think. It's what my trainer calls cheat days. Having a cheat day, having some chocolate or whiskey.
I Cato.
Yeah, how does that
not,
sound?
not, yeah, it was Cato, not Seneca. Who
It
like
was Cato. Okay.
it was Cato. But I think Seneca would, just judging by his biography, he would probably very much agree that there are exceptions. Or at least he was a very at odds with himself, it seems, and his own ideas a lot. Actually, just before we started the meeting, I'm trying to get this point back together. I recently read Seneca's on benefits, and I was thinking about this just before the meetup, and now the point. Sorry, not on benefits, on clemency, and he. I'm trying to get the point together again that I was trying to make. So maybe I'll just I'll just take my question or my statement back for the time being until I have it together.
But I also, on the flip side, actually, so yeah, we can come back to your question whenever you remember. So, as we're on the point of what sounds like is missing from Taoism that's in Stoicism, like this huge emphasis on ethics in Stoicism. On the flip side, I feel like there's something missing in Stoicism, and that's where Stoicism has all these tactics about sleeping on the cold stone floor or taking a cold shower or living in poverty or giving away some of your wealth to the needy, or to these small little discomforts that Stoicism advocates you practicing from time to time in order to kind of build your resilience up. On the flip side, Stoicism doesn't have anything to me that is recognizable to meditation. Like when you think of meditation, you think of Taoist or Buddhist monks, and that's canonical meditation. And then when you hear meditation in Stoicism in the West, it's completely different. I mean, the nearest thing to meditation is actually something completely different. It's Marcus Aurelius's journaling, negative visualization, his premeditatio malorum, something completely different. So just to something interesting I noticed is that the tools they use are completely different. I wonder, and I'm only questioning if one influenced one's philosophy or vice versa. So where in Stoicism, there's a huge emphasis on these different tactics, but also there's a huge emphasis on focus and reason. And on Taoism, there's a huge emphasis on letting go. And I wonder if that had inadvertently or perhaps intentionally informed the strategies they used to become more mindful. So in meditation, the whole point is not to feel it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if there's some sort of, if there's a meditative technique or strategy to be used to concentrate. But from what I understand is that in meditation, the idea is not to concentrate. The idea is to let go, is to be more aware of your body than your mind. Whereas in Stoicism, that is completely antithetical to the philosophy. I feel like that in Stoicism, you should never not be aware of your mind. You should always be cognizant of what your mind is thinking, and use your rationality to the fullest extent. I'm not too sure which one I admire more. I mean, I would say Stoicism right off the bat, but again, like Philip, as you were questioning about your comment before, I think it's always nice to have a bit of an eclectic understanding of these philosophies. Like, I think there would be times in which you need to focus and use your rational mind, whereas there might be times where you need to let go and de-stress and, just not concentrate on anything. Yeah.
Sorry. I'm just wondering about this concept of Wu Wei in Taoism and how that differs from Stoicism. I'm just taking a look here. And it describes Wu Wei as being an attitude of genuine non-action, motivated by a lack of desire to participate in human affairs. And that seems to be a distinct difference between Taoism and Stoicism. There's this Stoic idea of helping out in the community, even assuming political office or some form of office. So that seems to be a distinct difference. But I'm just wondering whether that can still be overlapped in some way with Stoicism, because there is this element of indifference and inaction in Stoicism as well. I'm just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say something. I think there's.
Sorry, yeah, I always just wait for somebody else to speak.
No, same. I'll try to anyways. I think they are again related concepts. And the picture that I like to, or the way by which I relate them is by thinking about this. Again, this famous, I can't remember where it's from. I think it might be Epictetus. The dog that is tied to the cart, or the two dogs that are tied to the cart. The one is pulling at the leash and trying to go one way and another way, and it can, pull and try as much as it can, but it'll always follow the cart. And the other animal, the other dog, is just calmly trotting along and enjoying the walk, where the other one is trying to force its way, and it's suffering and it's miserable. And I feel like there's a large overlap with the flow and the Wu Wei, because if you're following your natural path, if you're following the course of nature in the Stoic sense, to me that seems very similar to achieving the state of flow that the Taoists are talking about. I feel like conceptually they are very similar. But what you said about being active in the community, I'm not educated enough in Taoism to say anything about that in particular. But that also means that of what little I have seen, I don't think there's anything that speaks against it. I don't see anything that says that you have to move to the mountains and be a monk, as long as you're aware of your position in the world. And actually, similar to Stoicism, a Taoist monk or master or teacher would probably not necessarily go out and proclaim their wisdom and inform everybody of, I'm the greatest, I'm so educated, you should all listen to me, but would probably assume a more humble position and humble role. And I think this is something that, even though they probably, it's similar to a Stoic teacher, let's say.
I think the beginning for both Stoicism and Taoism is acceptance. That's the common base, that you accept things as they are. I mean, the famous Stoic saying, "God grant me." But in Taoism, it's the same. You just see your place in nature and you accept it. You don't fight it. I like the image of the two dogs. I've not seen that. Can you put in the chat where that is? Because that's an interesting story.
Mm-hmm. I'll look it up.
And I really believe in that. That if you fight nature, if you're desperately trying to do something else, that's when you become unhappy. It's the big basis. I do some work with resilience, working with executives, especially now with COVID and all of this. And the beginning of resilience is acceptance. We have a virus. It's here. It's not going to leave. And then you move on to other things. But trying to go with the flow. I mean, it's and that's the Taoist idea. And all these other things come in different places, like letting go. And Michael Singer, if you know his work, he writes about surrender, which is more than acceptance, sort of surrendering to life and to what happens. Or I work in improvisational theater, which is very different. There we talk about yes and. Yes, let's do that, and let's do more. Let's keep going. Let's, not yes, but, not, yes, and. So it's all about flowing and about, accepting and and that's a very good way to live, I think. Whether it's Taoist or it's Stoic or it's whatever it is called, but that makes a lot of sense to me.
I actually had the same initial confusion about Wu Wei, Tony, and so I definitely agree that there's like this basis of acceptance, but there was one video or another, and I started realizing that I got the idea of Wu Wei or this action by non-action completely wrong. So I think actually I felt like somebody learning about Stoicism, or hearing about Stoicism. And for the first time, when you hear about Stoicism, you're like, indifference. Does that mean you don't care about anything? Or apatheia? Does that mean you're just apathetic about everything? And I think when I first heard Wu Wei, that's what I kind of thought. I thought they deliberately wanted you to never act, but it was something different. And this idea of flow, what Philip and go with the flow, what Mark was saying, is that there's a good video that makes a parallel to when athletes talk about getting into that flow state. Or dancers or martial artists, when they say action by non-action, from what I understand is that they actually don't mean never to act. They just mean to basically practice or build the action into your habit, into your life so concretely, so intuitively, that you don't even need to think. Basically, you're acting without even acting. And I think that's so. For me, I mean, from that, what I think it implies is that it doesn't really imply anything particularly. I mean, it's a lot like Stoicism in the sense that you could basically apply it to anything you want to do. I think what's nice is that there is a Stoic ethics that we discuss a lot, and that helps anchor us. But with Taoism, this flow state in Wu Wei, it's completely free. You can be doing anything. You could be going out and doing service for your community. But as long as you're kind of in the flow, like Mark had said, and just that doing service to your community is kind of built in your nature, and you're just going along with that without even thinking, I think is what Wu Wei is supposed to mean. But again, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I had the first instinct. Like I felt like somebody learning about or mythologizing Stoicism for the first time. They don't get the idea of indifference, or for me, I didn't get the idea of Wu Wei first. Mark, I was actually just interested in asking you a question. I was curious to ask what you don't have to go into details if you don't want, but when you said you help executives build resilience or kind of understand things in context, any difficulties they go through, I'm just curious about the kind of work you do. Like, how do you apply your philosophy like that in your work?
Subtly and without making a fuss. I basically teach negotiation. That's my topic. I'm a former trade negotiator, and so I work with executives. I work with politicians and teaching negotiation skills. I have a little company. It's called Rational Games, because we do it playfully. We use a lot of playful methods. But I also have a pretty strong mindfulness practice and meditation practice, and I'm a trained philosopher, and I'm very fascinated with the overlap between those two. And resilience is one place that's really comes together. If you look at what's happened, this year with this whole situation with COVID, and how do you get through a period like that? And it starts with acceptance, and it goes on to all sorts of other things like generosity and forgiveness and all these other virtues. So that, and I do some executive coaching with very high-powered alpha politicians. I had one about an hour ago. And then I try to gently, we do little tests on their personality, and I ask them, are you happy? And is it, would you like to change that behavior? And so it flows in sort of unofficially. Normally I'm there to help them negotiate, and they get that. But I do, talk about being conscious, strategic, mindful, knowing what you're doing, knowing why you're doing it. And that's where I bring this in. That's where I get it, when I practice. But I don't overtly say we're going to meditate now. I don't bring, that scares people to some degree. I don't want to be esoteric with people. I always say it's a way of living.
Yeah.
Negotiation. In negotiation, you always have the choice between cooperating, extending a branch, trying to build a relationship and trusting people and taking risks and working with them, or competing. It's called the red and blue decision in game theory. And that's similar to this as well. You're going with the flow, you're cooperating, you're playing red. It's risky, you don't know what's going to happen. But it's more powerful than stopping and trying to be powerful and being swept away. So I see all sorts of parallels between spirituality and business.
Did you are you the author of the
Really interesting. Yeah.
Author of
of
what?
the rational game? Are you the author of the Rational Games book?
I am, in fact, yes. Yes.
Nice.
There are many used copies for sale on Amazon. I don't know what to think of that, but it's yes, no, it's not. You don't need to read it. It's really not terribly good. It's an adaptation of my dissertation. I've done other things. We have a website you might want to check out. I've written about mindful stuff. So if you go to www.rationalgames.com, you can read more about us. I did a TEDx about this as well. And there's a blog that might be of interest. That's more interesting than the book, frankly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
That's very cool. I have I've already 10 tabs open with all the book recommendations and talks, and so yeah. Thank you.
Mhm. I'm afraid I do have to sign off in a few minutes. If I can, I have a home front to think about, and I have to go get dinner. But
Of course.
I appreciate your
Mark, but so
opening to me. Yeah.
yeah,
So
thank you for joining us. It was really
Yeah. So how do I keep in touch? Do you have I guess you have a newsletter or a group or I don't know what to sign up for.
let me
I'll put my
so,
email if you don't have it. Yeah.
do you have I don't want to bombard you though with text messages or announcements. We have a Telegram group if you want to be interested in
I'm on
joining that, so
WhatsApp,
you get regular updates about it.
but not WhatsApp. It's Telegram, no? I've tried to reduce some of my.
It's
social
Telegram.
media. Yeah,
Or we have we just have a website. If you just there's the event page for us for our event today. But if you just, Philip wrote it to BerlinStoics.com, and if we post all our events there, so if you want to come to the next event, or you can see us there.
And hopefully you'll do something in person at some point, no? Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just once the formal regulations get lifted about people meeting in groups in person, then yeah.
That's coming. I think that's coming soon. We're down below 35 today, which is a record.
Yeah.
In Inzidenzwert, so that's encouraging. I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, I will sign off then, if I may. And thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been great, and I hope to see you again.
Cheers, Mark.
Glad you enjoyed it. It was nice to
All
have
the
you.
best.
Cheers.
Go with the
Cheers.
flow. See you.
Yeah. You're
Actually,
very modest,
I think
Mark, I think. Sorry, just saying, it seems quite a modest guy. Yeah, I've done some TED Talks. Yeah, I've authored a few books. Don't read the book, though. You don't have to read it. Okay, obviously I'll read it now. Okay. That was reverse psychology, I think.
Exactly. But that's his negotiation. He without even saying anything, he made us even more interested in reading it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm happy I asked. Rational Games is something I feel like I have heard before. The book, not his company, but his book. Maybe I heard it through. There's another psychological game theory book I have, and probably heard it through there. Anyway, it was great to have him. I hope he comes on board more often, because it'd be interesting to hear his input, especially because of his background. It's also interesting, just as a Stoic connection, I was really interested to hear like his, I mean, I know that's, like he said, it's not his business. His business is negotiation strategy and teaching that to his clients, but the subtle ways in which he actually incorporates Stoic resilience training in some of his discussions with his clients was super interesting.
Am I muted? Wait, everything is going upside down.
No, we hear you.
Okay, cool. I have a question for Dennis, actually, because you said that it's only been 2 weeks that you've been invested. I'm curious, did you mean Taoism or Stoicism, or how
Taoism.
did you?
Taoism.
Okay.
Taoism. I had seen your event before, and I had kind of marked it. I think it was a meetup, I believe.
Mhm.
So I would get reminders when there would be something to come. And anyway, like in the past months, I have opened myself up for a whole sort of new way of living, let's say, including starting meditation, yoga. I do loads of different practices now, or like trying to build a new way of like a new daily routine, let's say, and that's really beneficial. And recently, like, so 2 weeks ago, I came across the concept of Taoism through that podcast. And then I saw my email. I think it was an email, like a reminder that this event was coming up or something like this, about Stoicism with like in relation to Taoism. And I was like, okay, this is great, because in the meantime I was waiting for that book to arrive. It was just like, it was great timing. So I was like, okay, I cannot not join. Yeah, but that's
Nice.
kind of
Great.
my exposure. So Stoicism I have read a little bit, but just like summaries sort of thing, like not really been invested in the topic yet.
Can I ask you, Dennis, what interests you about Stoicism in particular? What do you find interesting about it? Because obviously we all have our own personal experiences with Stoicism, but
Yeah.
how does that work for you?
Well, for me, it's what I'd like to achieve and what I'm working on is to live a life in which I'm more easy on myself. Yeah. So, and honestly, I'm open to whatever meaningful good thing there is, like to live by, let's say, to help me doing so. Right. So, yeah, that's not, I don't know, that's not a very detailed description of why I would be why I'm interested, but that's kind of high level, the sort of reason why I'm open and very curious. Yeah, if that makes sense.
I'm sure it does. Yeah.
It's a unique answer too. Most people, I feel like most people give generic answers, and myself included. And to improve yourself, to be more productive. But your answer was to be, now I forget the word, but to be kinder to yourself, or to be more accepting of yourself. To paraphrase, it sounds a bit more sympathetic and in gratitude of yourself than when most people enter Stoicism, which I find endearing, which I find actually that sounds more Marcus Aurelius than it does most other Stoic philosophers. Epictetus was hard on himself, really hard on himself. He was much more into harsh Stoic training. Seneca, really prolific writer, but very different. But Marcus Aurelius has that attitude that to be a bit accepting and sympathetic to yourself before you go out and deal with other people. Like so it's really nice to hear somebody give like a very unique answer, very different answer, but that also hits home with Stoicism.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And in the discussion just a little bit earlier, like the comparison between the kind of Western philosophies and the Eastern philosophies, where I think the summary was that the Eastern philosophies are a bit more gentle, or like the Taoism is a bit more gentle, not putting too much rather unloading rather than unloading with requirements and expectations, etc. That I do know that I need that more than the unloading, let's say.
Yeah, for sure. Please, Steve, go ahead.
I was actually going to touch upon that principle. Actually, you made me think of something that's been sitting in my head about Taoism for the past few days, actually, Dennis, and that was there's actually this idea of letting go. There was another principle that that really struck with me, and it was one of the videos by Einzelgänger, and they were discussing this feature of Taoism of letting go in order to live in accordance with nature. But the specific phrase they used was when they were discussing modern life, and they were discussing kind of the rat race and people kind of gaining knowledge or getting more productive and doing this and doing that. And so usually when you go out and try and find, let's say, a mindfulness technique, or you learn more about self-help, you kind of gain knowledge. And there's this idea in Taoism that you should stop focusing on accumulating knowledge, and it's okay to sometimes let go of certain knowledge. I'm a teacher, and I found that actually quite interesting because it kind of fit in really, really nicely with this idea of change. So I think at first glance it could seem like a contradiction, but in order to, maybe I'm interpreting it wrong. Maybe the philosopher could correct me, but the way I interpreted it, that learning and unlearning, education, uneducation, or letting go and gaining these opposites, is that in order to change into something else, in order to improve, or in order to keep going, you always have to unlearn something in order to learn something new. Like in order to kind of rationalize it for myself, I thought of an example like a lot of U.S. Americans could think of the Tulsa massacre, this early 20th century small town basically massacre of an African American community by rioters in the early 20th century. Nobody knew about it, and the idea in American culture was didn't have the idea that at least racism was that deep-seated in our history. And so this idea of learning and unlearning, we had to first unlearn kind of the mythologies and the stereotypes about our own history in order to learn something else. And I'm not sure if that's the same kind of letting go and gentleness you're speaking about. But for me, that was an interpretation I found from that really resonated with me, which it could be equally compatible. But I found that there was a line, something that to learn and unlearn, that really struck with me, and with this principle of change and letting go. I could definitely incorporate that. Like it's something that I could take with me along with Stoicism, beyond merely beyond this discussion.
Something that what you said about, like, it's not just about learning new things. That's not the solution. Just accumulating more knowledge. There's this. It's called G.I. Joe fallacy. It might be interesting to read into that. It's like new. It's like a new theory by somewhere in science, in terms of that you learn a lesson, like that you learn a new wisdom doesn't necessarily mean that you actually apply it. And I think there was this. I'm not from the US, right? So I don't really know G.I. Joe, but maybe I think you're from the US, right, Steve? So I don't know.
It's just I think it's an action figure from the 90s.
Yeah. And then they finished at the end like a sentence that like with a wisdom, and if you knew the wisdom, then you're half the way. Like you're halfway. If you just know it, then you're halfway. But in life, it's not like that. We think that if we learn something, if we acquire the knowledge, then we're halfway there. In terms of making actually happen in life. But that's not true. Or that's just the very first step of such a long road. But our minds are focused on, as long as I get more knowledge, it means I'm closer to where I want to go. But that's actually not the case. So maybe that links to your comment about, acquiring knowledge is not the solution in itself, but also the unlearning.
I think
Yeah,
maybe
yeah, go ahead. I was just responding. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to change the subject. So please carry on.
I was just going to say, I mean, the Chiacho fallacy. That's really funny. Is that so? That's a philosophically or academically correct term. I mean, it's not out of the realm of crazy that philosophers take something from fiction and use it in academia. Oh yeah. Yeah, I'll look into it. Thank you. That's a really, and also something I was meditating on recently. I've tried to start focusing on more and more that whatever I do learn, that I incorporate. I do this with what helps me learning German. Actually, is I noticed that if I learn a new word or if I learn something new, I use it. If I'm speaking German, I start putting it into the sentences I'm using. If I have to say it in a weird way because I want to use that word, I'll say it in a weird way, because the more I use that word, the more I kind of understand it more intuitively. So I don't know if it's the same what you're talking about, but that seems to me is what you're expressing, this G.I. Joe fallacy, that it's beyond mere knowing the fact, which is another good one. Not judging a book by its cover, and most people do that anyway. And the common refrain, I don't know what made me think of this, but the common refrain people give when you tell them that, when you tell them some basic platitude like that, like don't judge a book by its cover, and they'll say, yeah, I know that, but they don't. You're telling them that for a reason, maybe because whether or not you're in the right to shame them, you're telling them that because maybe they really do need to focus on not judging a book by its cover, so to speak, because they haven't been doing that. But I think people often forget that. People say, I know that already. And I've always hated that, because I never like to tell people I know that. For one, it always came from me from the idea that I never like to feel like I'm a know-it-all. But on another point, it always it's a really good tactic if you kind of want to keep practicing and keep memorizing some really, really good tip of wisdom, which is something Stoicism actually is embedded in Stoicism. This idea of recurring many themes over and over again in order to practice them and embody them. Marcus, if you read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, he does this all the time. Like every book, like it's cut up into 13 books, but in every or 12, but in every one of the books, there's a few verses that you literally just read the chapter before in a different way, and it's something that you get used to, but you realize actually helps, because a few books down the road you probably forgot it, and now you're remembering it again. So it's actually a really good Stoic principle too. Yeah, Tony.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the point of letting go. And obviously there's overlap between Taoism and Stoicism. Letting go of things maybe which are out of our control. So in Stoicism, you would have the dichotomy of control. Things which you cannot control, you let go of. It's just not part of your active day. You don't contemplate them. You completely disregard them in that way. You're apathetic towards them. I wonder how on a practical level Taoists would do the same. Obviously, I don't see a parallel between Taoism and Stoicism with regards to the dichotomy of control. So do we know how practically they would let go? If you are thinking about something which is outside of your control, how would you practically let go of that as a Taoist?
That's super interesting.
I'll preface this with no, but I'll give you a short answer. I think Taoism may imply it, in the sense of that you should be indifferent or let go of control of things external to you. But on the other side, I will briefly say that I think Taoism does say something a little different than Stoicism. Stoicism has a marked difference between internal events and external events. Whereas with Taoism, it even seems like they're telling you to let go of certain, even some control of your own body. Not as like a complete surrender in your ability to be healthy, for example, or to meditate, but it even seems like mentally they're telling you to, Taoism is telling you to let go to an extent, which is something not in Stoicism. So I kind of agree and disagree. Like, I think you could maybe find a loophole that it implies it, but you're right that I think Taoism is a bit more whole in when it tells you to let go. It's not just telling you about external events, it's telling you about internal events as well. But I could be wrong, and that's just the sense I got from it.
Yeah, I don't have much
Actually,
to
you're
say
right.
about this in... Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. I was going to say, actually, that was one thing maybe I didn't like so much in Taoism. They're too much. They're a huge emphasis on letting go, but that's all I wanted to add.
I was just about to say that I don't have a good answer to your question, Tony. But in the preparation for this meetup and in what little I have read in the Tao Te Ching, there's bits in there that that sound very, very similar. Like that sound almost like they could have come from Marcus Aurelius, let's say, just to say a name. But maybe that's just me looking at it from my own personal background, and I'm just seeing what I'm expecting to see, and I'm interpreting it in, through my own lens, let's say. So I'm not sure, but I would be also very interested in practical ways of I mean, okay, meditation is the classic example, but how do you actually like I said, I find this really, really difficult, and more so recently. Like I said, my mind is always fighting slowing down, and it's probably part of the point of meditation, that you're resisting this urge to always consume, always to engage, always to learn, always to always be active, and just overcoming this impulse, and then accepting the quietness that follows. But yeah, it's very difficult for me. I really have to say.
I know I quoted that famous academic earlier, Bruce Lee. I did that because that quote has really helped me at times. Just be like, well, my sister said it to me once, and I was like, what's that mean? And then once you actually apply that, I just have the feeling that I sort of melt into my surroundings, and nothing really much matters at that point. I find it extremely powerful. Just to be like water, water will assume the shape of its environment, for example, seamlessly. I find that a very, very powerful tool personally. And at the danger of being a complete idiot, I will quote Bruce Lee once again. And a parallel with Taoism, when he's on the boat in Enter the Dragon, which is a classic scene, the art of fighting without fighting seems to be a particularly Taoist viewpoint, in my view. Inaction through action. Oh, sorry, action through inaction. Yeah, so I promise I won't quote Bruce Lee anymore, ever.
But it's interesting because I think in Taoism I've only heard someone speaking about it, so I don't point me on it, and I don't know the details yet. But it's also like by being so passive, right? And therefore not like toughen up or something like that. You also like the idea is to remain very flexible. So kind of like and they get like they make the parallel in nature that the plants who succeed, right, when there's like a really strong wind or like there's like an animal running again like over it or so, are the ones that are still that are very flexible, that are that are young. And like to keep young, you need to stay gentle, you need to stay flexible and not be too tough, because once you toughen up, it's like you're strong, you appear strong, but the moment there's like resistance against it, like it breaks, right? And so therefore, like I think they make the parallel about this gentleness, this passiveness actually helps the mind and helps yourself to remain like energetic and powerful by not being strong, like by not being like tough, right? That I found that very interesting.
So, Dennis, I'm intrigued. Do you have any particular sort of practical things that you do on a Stoic level each day? For instance, or you, I know you're quite new to Stoicism, but do you do anything Stoic each day if you're in a situation where you require some sort of mental assistance?
Not that I'm aware of, because I don't really know about Stoic practices yet.
Right.
But it would be great if you could maybe, I mean, or maybe afterwards or whatever, maybe suggest the best, like the introductions to Stoicism. That would be much appreciated. Yeah.
Sure. So there's this concept of the dichotomy of control, which we touched upon earlier.
Okay.
Internal and external events. So internal events are things that you can affect directly. And the Stoics mention them quite explicitly, in their writings. But things which you can't control would be considered to be external events. So you would naturally disregard them. So I'll give you an example. I wake up early every morning and it really peeves me. So maybe about 5:30 I'm awake. Nothing I can do about it. And my wife's next to me, my son's in the other room. So that's a chance for my brain to become extremely busy. So I use the dichotomy of control every morning. If a worry or a care comes into my brain and there's nothing I can do about it, it's completely disregarded. So that's a good point to start on a practical level, I think, for Stoicism. It really helps to sort out what should affect you and what shouldn't affect you practically each day.
Yeah. Yes. I'm going to read into that. Thank you.
Good.
And actually, Tony, what you said reminds me of one of the videos in Tea Time Taoism. He's speaking with his master, his Qigong Taiji master, and the master is telling him that the ideal time to wake up in the morning is between 6 and 7 o'clock, or it was 5 and 6, but I think it's 6 and 7. And then he was talking about how, not the master now the narrator is talking about how difficult it's always been to wake up in the morning early. But he said that the first thing that he does in the morning in order to wake himself up is, as soon as he wakes up, he doesn't just try and roll his eyes and try and stretch in bed. He just gets out of bed, puts his shoes on, and takes a walk outside. And that all of a sudden wakes him up. He can't go back to bed. And even if he wanted to, I mean, he's like getting outside and getting the fresh air and being around nature is just world's benefits to him, to kind of getting himself ready for the day and getting his mind ready for the day. Made me think, what you said made me think of like the whole waking up thing, made me think of what he was talking about. Which is also strangely also a Stoic thing. Another, I guess, to kind of compound on what Tony's talking about in terms of Stoic practices, I was also mentioning this idea of discomforts before in Stoicism, and in Stoicism, there are a few concrete practices, but there is a set of practices that doesn't really have like a prescription. It's just called practicing discomforts, and the idea is that you see this in a lot of the traditional Stoics, the classic Stoics, that they would purposefully give themselves non-luxurious or discomforting scenarios or materials in order to practice this idea of resilience, in order to build themselves up just in the event that anything happens, because they were big proponents of reducing expectations and always premeditating about what could happen in the future, negatively even. Not to the extent of exhaustion. That's something psychologists also like to point out today, is that not to the extent of ruminating on the future, but just to premeditate it once in a while. And so, for example, taking a walk in the morning, like it might be a huge discomfort to you to wake up early and take a walk, but if you had a good sleep, why not take a walk? It's a small discomfort, but it could help you in the long run. Cold showers is something I've heard a lot of people like to do. I don't particularly like to do it.
That's the point, Steve.
It could be yeah. It could be as simple as giving the free change you have with you to the person next to you who needs it. Although you may need it for a snack or something you want to get later that day, it's kind of foregoing that luxury or foregoing that comfort for the sake of doing something to build your resilience, or in this case, building your kind of cosmopolitan ethic. So building resilience through discomfort is another like set of Stoic practices, which I was reminded of when I was thinking of this Taoist waking up in the morning and going out for a walk thing. Yeah, I mean, we're in the end. We're in the end of our discussion. I mean, so we can continue this stream of thought about Stoic and Taoist practices.
Yeah. I just, like, last point, I swear, I'm going to be quick about it. Just while we're at this fits really nicely at the practices and contrasting it with Taoism. I think a Taoist would fundamentally disagree with the practice of interrogating your impulses. So the idea is that in Stoic teachings, any kind of feeling, any kind of impulse is made up of two parts. There is the involuntary reflex, and then once it has had the time to no, that's the wrong way of saying it. But think about maybe touching something hot, right? There's the involuntary reflex that you're gonna pull your hand away, and there's nothing you can do about it, which is a good thing. This is natural. That's the natural part. And then there's something that we rationally add to it after the fact, and that's the second part, which is I burned my hand, and that is something bad, right? You take an objective statement, and you attach a value judgment to it. And the Stoic would be, or in classical Stoic teachings, you would be encouraged to interrogate your thoughts and ask yourself, is this really something bad, or is this something that is indifferent? Like Tony was saying before, is this something external? Is this something that really affects my quality of life? Is this really something that affects my ability to do the right thing? And in 99% of all cases, you're going to say, no, this is nothing to me. And I think this goes pretty contrary to the idea of flow, because you're sort of consciously taking yourself out of the flow. You can't consciously looking at what is happening to you, and you're basing your reaction on that rather than the state of mind that you're in.
Oh, I thought you were going to keep. I didn't know you were done. It sounded like you were midway through a sentence at the end, and then.
Oh, sorry. I was done.
I've got a hard stop at 8 o'clock, so.
Yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
I've got a hard stop at 8 o'clock, so I'll be jumping off in a minute. But I just really want to thank you because this has been very, very insightful, and I've got loads of stuff to learn, like to deep dive into, and I'm pretty sure I'll join more often. This is really interesting and fun. So thank you very much.
That's great to hear. Yeah, stay in touch. If you're not already,
thank you.
If you're not already joined the Telegram group.
Yeah, I don't have Telegram, but I need to get around that someday. So yes, I'll figure that out. Okay.
All the best, Dennis.
Hey,
have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good evening. Bye bye.
Cheers.
You too.
Bye.
Steve, I seen
actually,
you.
Just before we end. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
I think we're about to say the same thing. Because for weeks, for months even, I meant to ask you about the contributing to keeping the lights on. So I seen that you've created a Patreon.
Oh no, we didn't. We weren't going to say the same thing, but it's fantastic that you bring that up. I mean, you guys are such regular comers here that I didn't think of, like, once Dennis and Mark left. I'm not going to. Donations is one of those things that, for one, it's not too expensive, and two, they were like this was their first discussion they attended. I didn't want to, in their first discussion say, "Hey, donate to us." Like, if I had to
show me the money, fellas. Show me the money.
If I had to pay a few $100s a month, that'd be different. But this is like, tops $30 a month. 30 years a month, so it's no big deal. Actually, what I wanted to mention was we have these discussions, and they're fantastic. I don't want to stop them, but I realized that when Philip, you're talking about how you've been struggling keeping up with meditation. I'm wondering if we shouldn't do, and I haven't done this because I haven't thought of a good way to model this digitally, because maybe this is probably best done in person. But I'm wondering if there shouldn't be maybe not weekly, because we do this so often, but maybe bi-weekly or monthly, have a meetup for Berlin Stoics where we just regularly practice these things. We don't do something different every time. We regularly practice. Like, we maybe spend an hour, maybe 10 or 20 minutes of that hour we meditate, 10 or 20 minutes of that hour we journal and negatively visualize, et cetera, et cetera. We kind of break it up, maybe just an hour or a little less, and we just, every month, we just practice this. And what you do on your own time is your own time, but this might provide a good maybe impetus, maybe motivation to kind of continue doing it outside of it. So I was wondering if you guys would be interested in doing that.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, I certainly would. I think there's a lot of value in that. Absolutely.
Okay. I might take a poll then soon in Telegram, like what Stoic practices people would most be interested in, because I don't think I can definitely, because if this would be pretty standard or consistent across every month, so we can ourselves keep track of how we're doing, we might want to focus on just 2 or 3 every time we meet up. So we're pretty much focused on really building those habits into our lives. But I'll talk about that in Telegram. Are you guys still on for Christianity and Stoicism next week?
Very interesting, actually. I mean, we touched upon it a couple of weeks ago now.
Yeah, it's like a thing that very often comes up naturally. So it'd be interesting to dive a bit deeper into that for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just interested to know, is there any sort of plagiarism going on, basically? So maybe we can find out.
Yeah, the last 2 weeks have been about Buddhism, Taoism, Stoicism, where the texts are similar but worlds apart. And I think this time it's going to be completely opposite. You know, it's pretty much going to be plagiarism verbatim.
Yeah.
On top of one another.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I have to go. I have somebody calling me. I have something at 8 too. So next Thursday at 6:30, I'll see everybody.
Great, chaps.
Thanks as always for organizing.
Yeah, thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Have a cracking week,
Have a good
guys.
weekend, everybody.
You too.
See you later.
Take
You
care.
too.
Ciao.
See ya. Bye.
See you.